Hey guys, it's Hank from Sprues and Brews, and today I got a special video for you. Gonna do things a little differently today. This is gonna be super casual, just chatting here. But I wanted to do a little retrospective on all the stuff that I built this year. As you can see, it was a pretty productive year for me. All in all, I made 18 builds, which is a lot. So obviously, if you've been following me on Instagram for the last few years, you're gonna recognize most of this stuff. If you are new to the YouTube channel, welcome, first of all. Really glad to have you aboard. A lot of the stuff here I built before I actually launched my YouTube channel, so I figured this would be a good opportunity to share with you guys some of the stuff that I made. So I'm gonna walk through each one of these sort of in chronological order from January of 2021 all the way to now, and just talk about what I learned with each one of these builds. Hopefully you guys can get something out of it. I can just share my stuff with y'all, and yeah, it's gonna be fun. So if you wanna stick around, we're gonna run through these real quick. Grab yourself a beverage, pull up a chair, get cozy, and let's have some fun. All right, guys, so before we get going here, this is Sprues and Brews after all, and it is a lovely rainy day here. So I'm gonna break out a little Guinness. If you haven't seen these cans yet, these are nice. This is like a Boston specific one for my area. I don't know if they're doing this elsewhere, but lovely. All right, I don't have any room to put this, and I don't wanna get these guys wet. Let's see. Nothing like the nitro in these things. It's beautiful. So Guinness pour is just so fun. It's not like anything else. And it always blows me away how perfectly it fits into a pint glass. Watch me say that and then I'm gonna spill. Yep. I should have thought this out ahead of time. Don't have anywhere to put my beer. Shite. There's a small puddle on the floor already, and that wasn't from me. I need to clean that up, 1 second. Okay, beer mess all cleaned up. We're off to a great start here, folks. So, I'm gonna refer to my notes during this chat here, so excuse me if I'm looking at my laptop. So I ran a little group build last year. Technically it started in December of 2020 and it ran until January 15th of 2021. But it was called the Sprues and Brews M4 group build. I wanted to celebrate reaching 1,000 followers on my Instagram account, and I wanted to find a cool group build that was really inclusive, and it was a subject matter that a lot of folks liked. So what I did was a Sherman group build, so to speak. But the catch was you could build any vehicle that was based on the M4 Sherman chassis. So you could build an M10 tank destroyer, you could build armored recovery vehicles on that chassis, or any of the litany of different Sherman variants over the years. So my contribution was this little M4A1 in 1st Armor Division markings. This is an Asuka kit in 135 scale. I added some Alpine miniature figures. Well, the commander was a relatively new Alpine miniature figure at the time. I was really excited to paint him up and super happy with how he came out. And then the driver and the co-driver positions are Tamiya bodies with Alpine miniature heads to kind of spruce those up a little bit. There's also some Value Gear resin stowage on the back of the tank. This diorama that I built here, it's a tissue box actually. This wooden piece on the bottom is an upside down tissue box. And the actual terrain itself is some foam with a bit of plaster for the actual earth texture. The tree here I made with oven baked clay and just texturized that. The inside of it has a little dowel for structural support. And then the palm fronds up here are just index cards, little note cards that I cut into shape and sliced the individual little fronds into. Super happy with how this came out. I love this little vignette, wedgie, I guess some people call it, little baby diorama here. The patch on the front there is just a regular 1st Armor Division patch. I picked it up. There's a Army Navy store pretty close to me, so grab that for like a couple bucks. And yeah, super happy with this one. The group build itself was an absolute blast. At the end of the day, we had 36 contestants, which I was blown away with. 36 phenomenal builders that contributed. They all made these awesome vehicles. And we had over 500 people vote on the prizes for the group build because it was a bit of a contest too. We had 4 winners, and I'm gonna shout them out here because they did an awesome job. We had Panzer Builder, Husey Builds, Kernizenko Scale, and Bulldog Models won our 4 prizes by popular vote. And a shout out to the guys that sponsored prizes. Sprue Cutter Models, Tank Craft Supply makes the awesome cutting mats. You've probably seen those around before, and Sauerkraut Models. And then a super big thank you to the folks over at Valor Studios. They sponsored our grand prize for that event. It was a signed copy of Adam Makos' novel Spearhead, and it was signed by Corporal Clarence Smoyer, who is one of the main guys in that book. He was actually the gunner in the M26 Pershing that took out the Panther tank in front of the Cologne Cathedral in 1945, which is just absolutely mind-blowing. Huge thank you to those guys, to Adam Makos, the folks over at Valor Studios. Super, super thoughtful prize there, and just incredible. So yeah, it was a fantastic time. I had a blast doing it, and it was a super fun way to kick off the year. So off to a good start there. As far as what I learned for this build, the big thing really was how to host a group build. It's a lot of work. So shout out to anybody that's done one of these before. It's a blast. I think everybody enjoyed themselves, and I had a really good time. But it's a lot of work to collect all the votes and repost everybody's material and keep it anonymous and just keep track of everything, to talk to people about prizes. But all in all, everybody pulled it together. The folks that sponsored prizes, again, were super, super helpful, and it was a blast. So yeah, my big takeaway from this first build was just how to host one of these things. It was a good time. All right, guys, so moving on here. The next thing that I made after the group build was over was this 148 scale Tamiya Bristol Beaufighter. And this was a really fun challenge for me. This was my first 148 scale multi-engine aircraft, and it was a really good time. So I needed a little palette cleanser after hosting the group build, because that was a ton of work, and I just wanted a relatively simple kit that I could put together. This Beaufighter I had picked up at a thrift store near me. I think it was 10 bucks, which was an absolute steal. And my fiance was away for the weekend, so I knocked out almost this entire build in a couple of days. Which is crazy, but you know, I was having fun with it, so whatever. When you're in the zone, you go with it. So this was my first multi-engine 148 scale fighter. The one thing that I think I learned here, I'm sure a lot of folks that are more experienced modelers know this, Tamiya decals can be a little rough, especially for aircraft. This guy didn't take too well to the decals. I was using a gloss coat that I don't use anymore, so maybe that has something to do with it, but the silvering was pretty rough on this, so I had to do a lot of little tips and tricks to try and remove the silvering, but I'm still happy with how it came out. I also fogged one of the canopy glasses a little bit, but it is what it is. You gotta roll with the punches here. But one thing I did learn is that Ammo MIG's Pacific Dust Wash works really well for popping the panels on a night fighter like this with an all black scheme or a dark scheme like this. So if you're doing a really dark colored fighter, a black fighter, night fighter, something like that, Pacific Dust Wash works pretty well. All right, so sticking with our multi-engine theme, the next kit that I built this year was this beautiful B-17. I love this kit. This is Academy's 172 scale B-17F. It's actually their Memphis Belle kit. I did not make this up in the Memphis Belle markings, however. This is actually the third one of these that I've done. It's a blast. If anybody saw my favorite builds video, this made it in there. I really love this kit. I think it's pretty user-friendly for somebody that's kind of just getting into the hobby as well. There are a lot of canopy decal, or there's a lot of canopy space that you need to mask off, which is kind of tricky, but it's really fun. It's also, the B-17 is super, super iconic. Everybody loves it, right? Everybody loves a B-17. So I wanted to do another one. The thing that I learned here that was pretty fun is I experimented with a lot of color modulation on the panels here and masking off individual panels on the wings and on the fuselage to try and really play with that olive drab, because USAAF vehicles are mostly olive drab or natural metal finish. And there's another ambulance going by. And you gotta play with that a little bit, make it look a little more dynamic. So I try to play with like darker olive drabs, lighter olive drabs, experiment a little bit here and there. And I was really happy with how this came out. I used some Kits World decals on here. Kits World makes some awesome aftermarket stuff. And I made this up as Blonde Bomber, which if I check my notes real quick, this aircraft is from the 91st Bomb Group, 324th Bomb Squadron, I can talk today. And she was known as Blonde Bomber by her crews. This was a blast. I made it up as part of Bulldog Models B-17 group build. He and a bunch of us did a little group build together, working on B-17s. Some folks were doing big 148 beasts. I chose to do this smaller one. And I really like these kits because they fit well in display cabinets. I've got an IKEA cabinet in the other room that's got most of my B-17s in it. And 172 scale is really manageable for this massive bird here. So yeah, what I learned, it's fun to play with color modulation on a vehicle that's all one color. You can create some really dynamic effects, and it just makes it a lot more visually interesting to the viewer here. So yeah, if you haven't made one of these 172 kits, the Academy 172 B-17, do yourself a favor, snag one. It's a blast. All right, so moving on. In the beginning of February, I was sticking with my USAAF theme, and I made this P-47D Razorback P-47 Thunderbolt. Thunderbolts are great. It's such an iconic aircraft. I love this build. This is a classic Tamiya kit. They make the D Razorback in the D bubble top variant. I wanted to go with the D Razorback because I just really like that old school line there, right along the spine. And this was a blast. This was an awesome kit to make. Again, used some Kits World decals, aftermarket decals for it. Really got to play with some weathering. I was learning about aircraft chipping because I'm still relatively new to aircraft modeling. I guess 2021 in a nutshell was probably the year of aircraft experimentation for me. As you can see here, I made a lot of aircraft and I learned a lot. But with this particular aircraft, I was working on chipping, was doing a lot of post chipping. So I'd finish all the painting and then do some like brush chipping with aluminum paint at the end. It's not the best look, at least I'm not very skilled at it yet, but I did learn a ton here and I got to experiment, and down the road, as you'll see on some of these other aircraft we talk about, I did some hairspray chipping, and I think that's a lot more effective, honestly. But this was a blast. What did I learn here? Oh, the interesting thing with this particular aircraft is some of the historical background behind it, and excuse me while I look at my notes. But this particular aircraft started out with the 353rd Fighter Group, 350th Fighter Squadron, and then later in the war, as that group transitioned out of the P-47 and into the P-51 Mustang, they transferred this plane with the tail code 274647 to the 56th Fighter Group. That's Hub Zemke's Wolfpack, the famous Wolfpack. They were all flying P-47s. And it was in the 62nd Fighter Squadron, which is pretty cool because one of the big things that I took away from this, and I'd encourage you to do the same, is try and look into the markings that you're putting on your aircraft. If they're just the ones that came with the model, or you buy some aftermarket ones, these, like I said, were Kits World decals. Poke around online and you'll probably be able to learn something about where your particular fighter or your particular aircraft served, and with what unit. You might even be able to find what pilot it was, which is really cool. So yeah, I learned that about this. Do a little history digging, really fun. Also, this kit, I learned a lot about building in sub-assemblies. The nice thing that Tamiya built into this, the engineering design here, is that I was able to keep both the wings off of the fuselage during the painting process, which made it a lot easier to handle, and I could really focus on painting and weathering, and then I just assembled the whole thing at the end, which was great. So yeah, takeaway there, read about your models, try to figure out the history behind them because it's pretty fun, you might learn something. And if you can, think ahead and try and build things in sub-assemblies. It's totally worth it. It's probably gonna make your life a lot easier. So yeah, P-47D Razorback was a blast. So the next thing I built, and this was still in February, this was a really important one for me, and I think it's an important thing to consider for everybody in this hobby. I refurbished this M48 Patton. This is the old Tamiya M48 Patton kit, the Vietnam War era tank here. And I had originally built it shortly after I started modeling because it's a relatively inexpensive kit, you can get it online. And I wanted to refurbish it, bring it up to my current standards. Folks that are familiar with my channel know that I like to do that sometimes with older kits. I'll leave a link in the video here to my kind of tutorial about how to go about refurbishing kits. But I wanted to do a project recognizing Black History Month in February. It was really important for me to do something to recognize Black History Month because I think in this hobby, folks of color aren't represented the way that they should be, honestly. And in the Vietnam War in particular, there were some huge disparities between the statistics of the black population in the United States versus the amount of African-American soldiers that served in Vietnam. I wrote down some stats here because I think it's important to note In 1967, African Americans made up about 11% of the population of the United States, right? That same year, 1967, nearly 65% of eligible black men for the draft in this country were drafted versus about 31% of eligible white men, right? So just let that sink in. By 1969, Robert McNamara's push to increase troop counts in Vietnam, there was a huge surge of troops going to Vietnam around that time. About 250,000 men were drafted between 67 and 69. 40% of those were young black men. Again, 11% of the US population, 40% of draftees. In the war in general, about a quarter, 25% of men fighting on the front lines, frontline combat units, were made up of African Americans, which again, huge disparity in the statistics there. So overwhelmingly, black men were called to serve, answered that call, and overwhelmingly made up combat units compared to their slice of the population. So I think it's really important to recognize these men and women that took up the call and served this country honorably, bravely during this conflict. So for this project, I wanted to represent that there were so many African Americans fighting in the Vietnam War, and instead of just painting all white figures, I wanted to incorporate that and be more representative. So with this Bravo 6 figure set that I picked up, I got to practice painting African American skin tones, which was a challenge for me, honestly, because a lot of the stuff I do is World War II and I'm painting a lot of Caucasian figures. So I got to experiment with that a little bit. It was a great experience. I'm gonna do it again. I'm probably gonna do another project this February, and I hope you guys join along because I think it's really important. But yeah, I had a blast with this one, and I think the big takeaway for me is that in scale modeling in this hobby, representation is important, and if we can make a small gesture like this to reflect how things actually were during these combat periods, these periods in history, it's really important to do so. All right, guys, so moving on here. The next 3 builds that I made were all Bf-109s. So I'm gonna kind of bundle this together. It was a busy spring of Bf-109s for me, as you can see. But I want to address something real quick before we move on, because I've been doing this scale modeling online for a while now, and inevitably, every time I post a Luftwaffe aircraft, someone in the comment section, or usually multiple people in the comment section, will say, there's something missing on the tail, or you're trying to erase history, which it's important for us to just pause for a second and address that. First of all, scale modeling is a hobby. It's an art form. And at the end of the day, I am making artistic choices, my own personal choices about how I want to portray these vehicles in my collection. As such, I've made the personal decision to leave that decal off of my Luftwaffe builds for a variety of reasons. One, I don't want to display it in my home. Simple enough. Two, I make content to share with folks on Instagram, on YouTube, just online in general, and including that in images frequently is a surefire way to get yourself either blocked or deleted or demonetized, which is not the most important reason, but it's also worth noting. The reason for that is it's illegal to display that symbol, that flag, in about a dozen countries, including, I wrote it down here because it's worth noting, this is impactful. It's illegal to show that symbol publicly in Germany, Austria, France, Latvia, Lithuania, the Netherlands, Poland, Romania, Russia, Sweden, and more. That's just to name a few. These bans are legitimate because regardless of the historical context, that symbol is internationally recognized as a symbol of hate and a symbol that represents a regime that tried to eradicate an entire ethnic group from the face of the earth. And unfortunately, it's not a symbol that's dead. It's still used by groups throughout the world, including in the United States, to reflect those same ideals, which is extremely disappointing, but this is a symbol that is still alive and it is still used by hate groups throughout the world. And I just need to address the argument that I'm erasing history, or I'm trying to whitewash history or something, is BS, because we're all amateur historians here. We know what we're doing. We're into this hobby. We read the history, we watch the movies, we watch the TV shows. You know what these planes are. I know what these planes are. There's a big German cross on the side of the planes. So nobody's forgetting where these came from. Also, to kind of prove my point here, I haven't mentioned the name of that symbol directly this whole time, and you know exactly what I'm talking about. So no, I'm not erasing history. I just don't want it on my artwork, and I don't want to disseminate that to the public. That's my personal choice. So, if you still care enough, and you're still mad at me enough that you didn't get to see that symbol today on my stuff, and you want to comment about it, I think that says more about you than it says about me. I know that the vast majority of people watching this video aren't gonna have a problem with that, but for the folks that do, I just need to address it. This is my decision. I don't want to include it on my builds. So with that said, let's move on. So the next build that I worked on was this HobbyBoss Bf-109F-4. This was my first time doing a HobbyBoss kit, at least a HobbyBoss aircraft, and I was pretty happy with it, honestly. It's a pretty simple kit. It's kind of like Eduardo's like the weekend edition kits, but this was their weekend edition, and it's a lot simpler. It's like a quick build type thing. There weren't a ton of parts here, but it was a blast. There's honestly a surprising level of detail on here. The rivet work that's built into the sculpt is great, and I had a blast with it. I used decals that I salvaged from other kits and some aftermarket decals because I wanted to create Gustav Rodel's Bf-109F-4. At this time, I was listening to Adam Makos's novel, A Higher Call, again. It's one of my favorites of all time. I love that book, and I like to listen to it when I run on audiobook. Do yourself a favor, if you haven't read it yet, pick it up, grab it on Audible, something like that. It's incredible. Because you learn about some really interesting pilots from World War II history and just some amazing events. But not to spoil any of that. But Gustav Rodel was a fighter pilot commander in JG-27, Jagdgeschwader 27 during the war. And for folks that have read that book, he was the guy that kind of took Franz Stiegler under his wing when he first joined the unit in Africa in the early parts of the war. He ended up being a very high scoring fighter ace. And one of the things that stuck with me, and kind of the reason I wanted to make this build, is there's a conversation that goes on in the book where Franz scores his first victory. And they come back and they're very excited and they say, oh, Franz scored his first kill. And Rodel kind of calls him on it. He says, we don't call them kills, we call them victories. You shoot for the plane, not for the man. And I'm paraphrasing here, but interesting because I think it kind of shines some light on the chivalry and the code of honor that these pilots, not just Luftwaffe pilots, but British pilots, American pilots, and other Commonwealth pilots were kind of using during the conflict. There was still this air of like knighthood, so to speak, among the fighter pilots, and it was just kind of interesting to get a glimpse of that. So I wanted to recreate his fighter when he was a squadron leader in JG-27 earlier in his career, and I had a blast with this one. It was a really fun kit, and what I learned is that HobbyBoss simple kits, they're pretty cheap. You can pick them up and have a lot of fun with them. You practice some techniques as I did here, and yeah, do yourself a favor, pick them up. They're a blast. After that, I built another Bf-109, another character that is in that book. I shouldn't say character, these are real people. But I made Johannes Steinhoff's Bf-109G6 from his time as the leader of JG-77 in Italy. This is one of Tamiya's legendary Bf-109G6 kits. This was the second of 3 that I have made now. Spoiler, we're gonna cover another one in a bit. But it's a phenomenal kit. I've spoken about it multiple times. I'm sure many of you have built it, and if you haven't, it's worth picking up. It's a lovely kit. I used aftermarket decals for this to achieve his scheme with JG-77, and he's another one of those really interesting characters. Johannes Steinhoff, he was one of the early fighter pilots. Originally, he was training for the Navy, for the Kriegsmarine, when they were trying to figure out an aircraft carrier program. When that was scrapped, he was passed over to the Luftwaffe, and he worked his way through the ranks. He was in JG-52 for a while. He became the leader of JG-77, and he ended the war flying Me-262 jets with Adolphe Galland's JV-44. He was in that squadron when he suffered a horrific accident. He crashed his aircraft on takeoff and suffered severe burns. It's honestly amazing that he survived that. And he went on to have an amazing career in the post-war German military. He was crucial in the setup of the Bundesluftwaffe after the war, and he was involved with NATO through to the end of his career, his retirement. Really interesting guy, worth reading about, and I wanted to create his aircraft, so I did that here. I had a blast with it. One thing I learned, I think it's fun to try and source decals to make an aircraft that you want to build, right? Instead of just using the decals that came in the kit. So do some research, poke around, try and find a particular aircraft from a particular time period that you want to replicate, and see if you can source the decals from other kits that you have or find the aftermarket decals online, because you can pretty much make whatever you want. The sky's the limit. So I had a ton of fun with this one, and I highly recommend picking up this kit if you haven't already. So moving on, the last one of this trio here, I did another Tamiya Bf-109. This is their E4 variant up here in the front with the yellow nose. This is Adolphe Galland's mount during his time with JG-26 during the Battle of Britain. Another one of those really interesting folks to read about. I think he's gone down in history as one of these very charismatic characters because there were a lot of amazing stories that came out after the war that he's just a really interesting guy. Again, he fought in the Spanish Civil War, was one of those folks that was a career aviator. He was, I believe, the youngest general in German military history at like the age of 32 or something, in his early 30s. And he was the general of fighters for the Luftwaffe early in the war until he was eventually fired for having disagreements with Airman Göring. And there's a whole other story behind that we won't get into today, but interesting guy. He was known for his trademark cigars. He had a Mickey Mouse doodle painted on the side of his aircraft. And as I mentioned when I was talking about Steinhoff, after he was fired from his general position, he kept the rank, but he was allowed to set up a special fighter wing. They called it the squadron of experts flying Me-262 jets at the end of the war. And he collected basically a who's who of the top aces of the time to fly in that squadron with him. Really interesting guy, and he has his own memoir that you can read, and he's discussed in a lot of these books. As I mentioned kind of before we got into this, it is important to keep in mind the historical context for these pilots and who they were fighting for, but I encourage you to read into them a little bit because there's some very interesting material there, and their disagreements with their own party, or the party that was leading their country, are very interesting, and the attempts that were made from within to disrupt that and kind of stop the madness are very well documented. So check these guys out, pretty interesting. So we've been talking about jets a little bit here. Right here, front and center, this was the next build I did. This is Tamiya's 148 scale Me-262A-1a. It's an iconic aircraft. The Me-262 was the first combat functional jet, came out later in the war, and this thing was a beast. It's one of the most beautiful aircraft, I think, of the Second World War. Those lines, it looks like a shark. It looks like something that should be in the water. It's amazing. But what I wanted to do with this kit is I wanted to experiment around that concept of a very late war fighter aircraft when Germany was scrapping together everything they had to make these planes. So this one, you can see I tried to make this like a replacement tail that was plugged on there at the end. It's a very simple paint job, and I also practiced, I guess the big takeaway from this one is I got to really practice my chipping techniques. So I did some hairspray chipping. I have some videos that kind of discuss that technique. I'll leave a link here to one about this Pack 36 that we'll talk about in a little bit. But it's just the hairspray chipping method, and I really love this result. It looks like a battle-worn, beat to hell Me-262, and I just had a lot of fun with it. So yeah, iconic aircraft, really fun build. If you haven't picked up an Me-262 kit, I recommend it. It's a blast. All right, so moving on, gonna switch gears and talk about some USAAF aircraft here. I participated in another group build. This was hosted by a good friend of the channel, Sprue Cutter Models. If you don't know him, go check him out on Instagram, does some awesome stuff. But he hosted a group build, which is called the Lightning 2K group build, to kind of celebrate him hitting 2,000 followers on Instagram. And there was another awesome turnout for this. The name of the game was P-38 Lightnings. All Lightnings, all the time. And a ton of people participated in this. There were some phenomenal builds. My contribution was this little diorama here. This is Tamiya's 148 scale P-38F kit. I made it up as the G model. And I wanted to replicate a specific vehicle from history using the decals that came with the kit, actually. But this particular P-38 was flown by Lieutenant Rex Barber, and it's believed, it's pretty well documented, that he was the pilot that actually shot down Admiral Yamamoto during what was known as Operation Vengeance. This was a special secret mission to intercept Admiral Yamamoto and shoot him down. For folks that don't really know, Admiral Yamamoto is kind of known as the architect behind the attack on Pearl Harbor. So this special mission was devised where a group of P-38s flew this ridiculous route over open water at low levels, radio silence, and had to get to the exact spot where Yamamoto was supposed to appear. They had intercepted radio transmissions and shoot him down. There was like zero room for error here, and somehow they pulled it off. They did shoot down Yamamoto. His aircraft crashed. He was killed in action. And it just will go down in history as one of the most amazing secret operations of all time. So I tried to replicate that a little bit. This is the scene to me, basically, is Barber just before they left in front of his aircraft there. And I had a blast with this one. It was really fun. Again, thank you to Sprue Cutter Models for hosting this group build. It was a really, really good time here, and gave me a chance to build this iconic kit, this modern classic, I guess, from Tamiya. I guess the takeaway for me, what I learned here, again, other than that beautiful historical context, was just how complicated this plane is. It's a funky little thing with the twin beams and the double engine setup here. This is a really tricky one to build, and there was a lot of planning ahead that I had to do. Don't let that deter you. This is a really fun kit. If you have some aircraft experience under your belt, I highly recommend it, but it's not a weekend slammer. You're not gonna be able to make this in a short amount of time. This took me a full month to build, basically. But really, really fun, awesome kit, had a blast with it. Pick one up if you get a chance. All right, sticking with the Pacific theater of operations, we're gonna move over here to this little 1/700 scale diorama. And I wanted to do something to recognize the anniversary of the Battle of Midway. So I made up the USS Yorktown, CV-5, and the escort destroyer USS Hammond, CV-412, or sorry, DD-412, USS Hammond DD-412. These were two critical players in the Battle of Midway. I won't get into the history of the Battle of Midway here. I think most folks know it. If you don't, there are some phenomenal documentary content on YouTube for free. Go check it out. But for me, this was my first 1/700 scale marine build, ship build. My first ship build ever, really. And a lot of challenges with that. It was really fun. This scale is so small compared to what I usually do. And just painting up this whole, slew of aircraft was a challenge in itself, just to get some level of detail at that scale. The figures also, they're just little photo etch guys that you kind of snip off. There are like 200 figures on this ship, and that took me hours in itself just to put them all on there. The base is made out of foam, and I used Mod Podge to actually make the wave textures here, which was really fun, actually. It worked out pretty well. So I recommend experimenting with that if you get a chance. Again, this was my first ship build. I definitely plan on doing more. I had a really good time with this, and the big takeaway for me is just learning about ship modeling. I know there's a whole community of folks out there that just do naval stuff, and it's really fun, and I commend you for it because it is small and it is very difficult, and you have to be very patient. But I had a blast with it, really good time, and I'll definitely do something like that in the future. We're only like 3/4 of the way through and my beer is gone. Oh well. Anyway, we'll keep trucking here. We got a hat trick for the Pacific Theater of Operations theme here. Up in the front, this is a Tamiya 148 scale F4 F4 Wildcat, and I did this as a buddy build with, again, good friend of the channel, Sprue Cutter Models. Go check him out on Instagram, great guy. We were trying to figure out something to do together as a buddy build, and we landed on Wildcats. It's a really cool early war aircraft. This is a classic Tamiya kit I'd been eyeballing for a while, and I was hyped on the Navy aircraft after doing my Yorktown build here, and I wanted to stick with that theme. So the aircraft that I built up here, this particular F4F, was flown by Lieutenant Commander John Thatch during the Battle of Midway. He was commanding the fighter unit that was flying off of the USS Yorktown. The one thing I will note here is at that time, this aircraft would not have had those drop tanks, so that is anachronistic, and that is my fault. But that's okay. I'm telling you guys, don't tell anybody else. But this was fun. It's like I said, a really cool classic kit. I got to experiment with US Navy colors because I don't do a ton of US Navy fighters, so I got to really play around with that. It was really fun. And again, I got to work on that hairspray chipping technique. I think that was probably the big takeaway for me, was how to find the right balance with that hairspray chipping, because you don't want to go too aggressive. These planes, their service life was not that long, honestly, so they wouldn't have gotten totally beat to all hell. But you want to get a nice balance there, especially with Navy aircraft like this, because they are exposed to the elements and stuff like that. But yeah, this was a blast. I would love to do another one of these someday. It's a relatively inexpensive kit, so if you're interested in Navy aviation, the history of Navy aviation, this is a good one to go out and grab. It runs like 20 to 30 bucks. It's not too expensive at all. So check it out. It's a fun one. And again, shout out to Sprue Cutter Models. This was a blast. Let's do another group build soon. All right, guys, we're in YouTube territory here. So Sprues and Brews scale modeling on YouTube exists now. This was around the summer, late summer of this year. And the first one on here is this Churchill. So I actually built this Churchill up a while ago, but I refurbed this for my Hessian tape and netting and tarp tutorial. One thing that folks have been asking me about for a really long time is how I make the Hessian tape and like net camouflage for Commonwealth vehicles. I did this with a Sherman Firefly a while back, and a lot of folks were really curious about it. So I did a little tutorial on how to do that. I'll link to it here if you'd like to check it out. So I refurbished this Churchill kit, kind of following those techniques so I could share it all with you. And for me, the learning curve here, the takeaway was kind of how to film tutorial videos for YouTube. This was my first big tutorial video. And it's a really fun technique. I hope you guys enjoy it. If you want to try it out, if you're doing a Commonwealth vehicle, give it a go. It's pretty fun, and you can do it with stuff that you've found around the house. It's really just masking tape and like gauze, but it's a blast. So yeah, the takeaway for me was just how to film these videos and how to kind of record and share this stuff with you guys, how to edit it and all that jazz. But really fun. The Churchill is an iconic behemoth of an infantry support tank, and I had a blast with it. So yeah, this is a really fun one. So the next kit that I built isn't actually here because I don't have it anymore. I built up a 172 scale Academy TBF-1 Avenger as a commission. I worked out with somebody. They wanted a Midway era TBF Avenger for their office. And you might be saying, Avengers at Midway? And fun fact there, while the Dauntless kind of gets the bad reputation for being the not so successful torpedo bomber at the Battle of Midway, there were a handful of Avengers that actually participated. They didn't make it in time with the aircraft carriers that were going to the Battle of Midway. They actually flew out late from California, hopped over to Hawaii, and then hopped over to Midway itself. And a small contingent of TBF Avengers, they did make a torpedo run on the Japanese aircraft carriers, no hits. And only a single aircraft survived and made it back to Midway. That was the one that I depicted here using aftermarket decals. And it was a really fun project. I like 172 scale because it's relatively small and it kind of challenges you to accentuate decals and kind of focus on scale there. I also got to make this little base that I did with it. It's kind of a simple water base. And it was really fun. I like doing commission builds. It's fun to make something and share it with somebody, as hard as it is to say goodbye to a piece that you spent a lot of time on. Hopefully it is in a happy new home now, and he's enjoying it. So if you're watching, thanks again for the commission there, and hope the Avenger's doing well. All right, so next one. This is our second to last Bf-109. I know I made a lot of Bf-109s, but it's just a beautiful aircraft and one of the most iconic of the war. I did Werner Mulder's Bf-109E-3 from around the Battle of Britain time, Battle of France, Battle of Britain. It's right here in the front with the JG53 markings, the Ace of Spade markings on it. Werner Mulder's, for folks that don't know, was he was the original general of fighters before Galland. He was one of the earliest fighter aces in the Luftwaffe. He was one of the first heroes of the Luftwaffe. And I believe he was the first man to make it to 100 aerial victories. If I'm wrong, I know someone will tell me in the comments, but I'm pretty sure that was the stat that he achieved. And he was constantly competing with Adolphe Galland. They both served in the Spanish Civil War together, and then they fought in the early war actions, Battle of France, Battle of Britain, etc. Mulders was killed in an aircraft crash early in the war. He was returning to Germany for a funeral, and the transport aircraft he was on was shot down. But this plane in particular, I wanted to practice my modeling techniques, MOTTLING, for a group build that Sprue Cutter Models, again, our man Sprue Cutter Models, was hosting a little bit down the road. We'll get to that in a minute. But I just wanted to practice my painting techniques on this to get that really iconic Luftwaffe modeled paint look. I had the kit lying around, and I figured that was a good excuse to do it. So I had a blast with this one. Honestly, really proud of this kit. I love the finished product. I think it looks really cool. And just another iconic aircraft belonging to one of the all-time aces for my collection. All right, guys, just a few more builds here. The next one, again, there's a YouTube video out there for this on my channel if you want to check it out, was the M10 tank destroyer up in the front there. Again, this was a kit that I built a while back, and I wanted to use this as an opportunity to talk about refurbishing your kits. I think this is a really important thing to do as a scale modeler, is to take kits that you built a long time ago that might not be up to your current standards, your current skill level, and just give them a makeover. Give them a big old makeover, basically. Don't be afraid to go back and repaint, re-weather, add elements to a kit that you built a while ago. If you're not super happy with the result, and it's just taking up space in your cabinet, spruce it up. Bring it up to the level that you're at now. So that was the case with this M10. I didn't love the weathering that I'd done on it a few years back, so I took it down. It was on a little diorama base, popped it off, repainted the whole thing, re-weathered the whole thing, added some tarps, you name it. And I'm super happy with how it came out. And hopefully in the video that I made, you can check it out here, I help some folks figure out ways that they can refurbish their old kits. I think, again, it's a really important skill to practice, to use kits that you have, and importantly, it's gonna save you some money. You don't have to go buy a new kit and rebuild it every time. Spruce up the stuff you have, and you're gonna learn a lot. M10 was a great little one. I love that kit. It's an awesome kit from Tamiya, their 135 M10 tank destroyer. Anyway, if you haven't built one, I do recommend picking it up. It's a blast. But yeah, so that was a good one. All right, last two builds of the year. Again, front and center here. The last Bf-109 on the list, go figure, will not be the last that I make. I'm sorry, I guess. But anyway, this again is Tamiya's iconic Bf-109G6 kit. I built this up for Model Mania. This was a group build that Sprue Cutter Models hosted, and the only qualifications is you had to have an aircraft or a vehicle that was modeled. So modeling is basically just that sporadic kind of splotchy paint effect that you see in camouflage on German Luftwaffe aircraft in particular. So for that, I thought it was a good excuse to build up an aircraft belonging to the ace of aces, Eric Hartmann, who's the highest scoring fighter ace of all time of any nation. Shot down 352 enemy fighters during World War II, which is just bananas. That's so many aircraft. But yeah, he is the highest scoring fighter ace of all time, and he probably always will be. I mean, definitely always will be. No one's gonna shoot down nearly that many planes ever again. But yeah, so I wanted to create his aircraft. It's this iconic black tulip scheme. They call it black tulip, those decals on the front of the nose there. Would have been a paint job on the front of the nose there on the real vehicle. But yeah, super iconic aircraft, super iconic fighter pilot, and I wanted to give it my best shot. Takeaway for me here, I got some aftermarket decals from Eagle Editions for this project, and patience was the name of the game. Patience and a lot of setting solutions for decals. It was really difficult to get those decals to settle over all the details on the engine cowling there. There were 14 decals in all making up that nose piece, and it took a couple days just to do those. So you just go slow, stick with it, and the result is going to pay off in the end. Really happy with how this came out. It was a super fun project, and I was excited to add this iconic vehicle to my collection. All right, guys, very last one. Up there in the front, little artillery piece. This is Tamiya's 135 scale, 3.7 centimeter Pack 36. It's a classic kit from them, a little artillery piece with some attendants, figure attendants that I haven't painted up yet, but I'm gonna do as well. I did this right at the end of the year here as a tutorial video to talk about chipping. And it's a really simple technique, and it can really spruce up your builds. Basically what you do is you paint a layer, you put on a layer of paint, and then you spray hairspray over it, like regular hairspray. And then it kind of creates a temporary seal over the paint that you just did. Then you spray another layer over it, and if you take like a wet toothbrush or a wet brush, like paintbrush, toothpick, whatever, and you just gently scrape away at it, it's gonna peel off that little layer of paint that is on the surface and reveal what's below it. So it can help you create some really genuine scratches and chipping techniques, because it is chipping. It's actually chipping paint, unlike trying to replicate it with a paintbrush, like painting paint over your existing paint or something. I said paint a lot, but watch the video, it'll make sense to you. Yeah, but it was fun to round out the year with a nice, simple, classic kit like that. But yeah, it was a good one. So that's it, guys. My Guinness is gone, and we've talked about every single model kit that I built this year. Productive year. It was a good year. I mean, I know there's a lot of craziness going on in the world right now. For us scale modelers, I suppose hunkering down inside is not the worst thing in the world for us. But yeah, it was a productive year. I made a lot of stuff. I learned a lot of stuff. And I got to start this YouTube channel and start sharing my content with you guys on here. So thank you so much for joining in this experience with me, for just joining this journey on YouTube. I'm gonna keep posting great content moving into next year and beyond. So yeah, if you enjoyed the video, please leave a comment below. Tell me what your favorite build was. Let me know what you want to see more of, what you want to see less of, what kind of video tutorials you're hoping for in the new year. The possibilities are endless. Onwards and upwards, right guys? So yeah, that's it for me. I have to put these all back in my display cabinet. I also have to videotape all of them for the overlay videos that I just did, so that's probably going to take a while. But yeah, hope you guys enjoyed this. Until next time, I hope you have a safe and happy new year, and we'll see you on the other side. So be well, happy building, cheers.